One of these movies bankrupted its own studio. One made Steve McQueen quit acting. Another got buried because critics couldn't handle it. But Kevin Costner doesn't care. These are the 10 films he thinks are better than anything playing in theaters right now. The Sand Pebbles never gets mentioned alongside The Great Escape, but it's one of Steve McQueen's best. Set in 1925 Shanghai, it's about a U.S. Navy gunboat crew caught in rising political tensions. McQueen gave one of his most acclaimed performances here. In fact, this was the only role he ever got an Oscar nomination for. But behind the scenes, he was a nightmare. He fought constantly with director Robert Wise, hated changes to the script, and flat out refused to shoot some scenes. The whole thing wore him down so much, he quit acting altogether for a couple of years. He said making this movie felt like paying off every sin he'd ever committed. The shoot was brutal. They filmed in Taiwan, and it was chaos. Heat, typhoons, half the cast got sick, and the whole production dragged out way longer than expected. Still, Robert Wise loved the final product so much, he hosted parties every year to celebrate it with the surviving cast and crew. Costner described it as maybe a perfect movie for him. He said McQueen fit the role beautifully, and the scale of it, the sense of history, it opened something up for him. He saw it as one of the films that helped him understand the world a little better. And honestly, that tells you everything about why this one matters to him. This one's legendary, but what makes it interesting is how close Costner came to directing it himself. Back when the script was still being passed around under the titles Whore's Gold and the William Money Killings, he seriously considered taking it on. He didn't, of course. Clint Eastwood ended up directing it a decade later, but Costner still calls it one of the greats. The script was written by David Peoples, and it sat in a drawer for years. Eastwood loved it from the start, but held onto it until he felt old enough to play the lead himself. It won Best Picture. Gene Hackman won Best Supporting Actor. And it made over $150 million worldwide, which was no small thing for a slow-burn Western at the time. Costner said he always knew it had a chance to be great, not because of the cast or the budget, but because the writing was just that good. And Clint himself said he hadn't seen a script that powerful since The Outlaw Josie Wales. Costner's got a real soft spot for this one. Liberty Valance isn't flashy, it's not full of shootouts or sweeping vistas, but the writing is where it shines. It stars Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne. Stewart plays a senator who comes back to a dusty frontier town to attend the funeral of an old friend, Wayne's character. And that sets off this whole quiet, slow-burning story about how legends get made and how the truth doesn't always matter when the myth is more useful. It's directed by John Ford, and it feels different from his other westerns. More stripped down, more bitter. At the time, a lot of critics saw it as one of Ford's weaker films. They stuck it on the bottom half of double bills and didn't think much of it, but over time, it's become one of the most respected movies in the genre. Behind the scenes, it wasn't exactly fun. Ford was cranky and constantly gave John Wayne a hard time. Some say out of spite because the studio forced him to cast Wayne in the first place. And Wayne was already sick, though he didn't know it yet. He was diagnosed with lung cancer a couple of years later. But even with all that, the film came together beautifully. It's sharp, reflective, and full of gray areas. Sergio Leone called it his favorite John Ford film, said it was the only one where Ford finally understood pessimism. Cool Hand Luke was a box office hit when it came out, and over time it became something even bigger, what a lot of people have called the touchstone of an era. Paul Newman plays this laid-back Southern guy who gets thrown in a rural prison and just flat-out refuses to conform. It picked up 4 Oscar nominations, including one for Newman, and it won Best Supporting Actor. Newman told the writers not to tailor the script for him. He didn't want an easy role that played to his strengths. He wanted to stretch. He once said, "I had great fun with that part. I liked that man." And that shows. The performance holds up. It's not just Costner who admires it. Guys like Jason Statham and Woody Harrelson have also named it one of their all-time favorites. Costner once said, "It's hard to make a good Western, and when people are lazy in their approach, It's just dirty. And Giant proves that with the right ambition, you can aim higher. It's still one of the best examples of how a Western can go beyond shootouts and horses and say something bigger about power, class, and race in America. It's a full-blown epic about a Texas ranching family getting torn apart by jealousy, changing times, and the rise of big oil. James Dean, Rock Hudson, and Elizabeth Taylor lead the cast, and it's one of those rare films that actually lives up to its title. It runs over 3 hours without an intermission, and every minute of it goes toward building something that feels huge, emotionally and visually. James Dean wanted the part so badly, he offered to take a pay cut just to be in it. George Stevens directed, and it paid off. He won the Oscar for Best Director. The movie picked up 10 nominations total. Costner has always talked about how Ford Apache shaped the way he thinks about character, and just as importantly, lack of character. The story follows Lieutenant Colonel Owen Thursday, who comes out west with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. He looks down on everyone around him, treats the Native Americans with open hostility, and ends up pushing things way too far. Standing in his way is Captain Kirby York, played by John Wayne, who's trying to keep the peace and deal with the fallout from Thursday's decisions. The movie's got some great behind-the-scenes stories too, like how John Agar never forgot how much help Wayne gave him as a nervous young actor. They'd go on to make 5 more films together. Ford himself used to brush this one off as a potboiler made for money, but that doesn't hold up. It's part of his Cavalry trilogy, and it's now seen as one of the essential films about the darker side of westward expansion. Rio Grande is a John Ford cavalry western, one of the last ones he made, starring John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. Wayne plays a cavalry officer trying to hold the line against Apaches while dealing with the return of his estranged wife and their son, who's just joined the army. This movie only exists because Ford wanted to make The Quiet Man, and Republic Pictures didn't think The Quiet Man would make any money. So the studio made a deal with him. If he did Rio Grande first with Wayne and O'Hara, they'd greenlight his passion project. Ford agreed. Some folks say Ford didn't take Rio Grande all that seriously. Harry Carey Jr. even called it one of his vacation pictures. The budget was tight, half of what they spent on Ford Apache, and the studio didn't expect much from it. But according to the making of doc, the cast and crew gave it everything. Leonard Maltin said Ford had too much pride to phone anything in, even if it was just a studio favor. Costner has his own connection to the film. He ended up shooting one of his own movies just a couple miles away from the exact same location in Utah, and he talked about what it meant to him. He said he used to watch Rio Grande and then found himself walking those same trails, seeing those same mountains. He even told the story of taking a solo drive just to see Monument Valley for the first time and how it made him tear up. He also talked about how this Western is more complicated than people give it credit for. You've got story, dilemma, and the power of the landscape all working together. Costner's a big John Ford guy, and The Searchers is one of the films he always goes back to. He said not everything in a movie hits, but this one had parts that were dead on. He respects how Ford took the Western out of California and shot in more realistic locations, and he also admitted he can't stand Westerns where the costumes don't look right. So this one checks the boxes for him. The Searchers is one of the most iconic Westerns ever made. John Wayne plays Ethan Edwards, a man on an obsessive search for his kidnapped niece. And it's not just a rescue mission, it's a look at obsession, vengeance, and what happens to a man who can't let go of the past. Critics have called it everything from distinguished to remarkable. Roger Ebert singled it out as one of Ford and Wayne's greatest character studies, and Scorsese put it in his all-time top 10. That should tell you something. Costner didn't just stick to Westerns. He also named It's a Wonderful Life as one of his favorite films. And that's not surprising. The movie's got real emotional weight behind it, and a story that hit a lot of people hard, especially in the years after the war. It came out in 1946 and almost nobody saw it. It made just over $3 million on a $3.18 million budget. That basically wiped out the studio that made it. Liberty Films collapsed right after. It took decades and a public domain fluke before the movie finally got embraced as a holiday classic. But the emotion in that movie wasn't just acting. Jimmy Stewart was still dealing with PTSD from World War II. He had flown combat missions, he had seen civilians die, and the stuff he brought into that role came from a real place. That bar scene where George breaks down and starts sobbing, that wasn't scripted. That was Stewart losing it in the middle of the take, and the director just kept rolling. Costner said the movie's got something supernatural going on, but what really stands out to him is the stuff that doesn't get said between fathers and sons, and that's pretty endearing. Costner's got a deep respect for this one. He said flat out, "One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a perfect movie, and he's not alone." Ethan Hawke called it the great American novel of its time, and J.K. Simmons said it was beautifully done. But behind the scenes, it was total chaos. The original author, Ken Kesey, hated the movie, sued the producers, said he was furious they cut his main character, Chief Bromden, out of the spotlight and made McMurphy the focus instead. He wanted a cut of the profits and nearly $1 million in damages. Settled eventually, but never watched the film. And then there's the tension between Jack Nicholson and director Miloš Forman. They couldn't stand each other. At one point, they stopped speaking completely and had to pass messages through the cinematographer. Despite all that, the movie cleaned house at the Oscars. 5 major wins, including Best Picture.